Hi, everybody, and welcome to a Friday Fireside Chat. My name's Rita McGrath. You probably knew that. Just to remind you, this is being recorded, so don't say anything you don't want your aunt, uncle, or grandmother to find out about. And my guest this week is Chip Conley, who has done many, many things in a wonderful life. But what we're going to talk about mostly today is his wonderful book, Learning to Love Midlife. 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. And, from my vantage point, that's a really great message.
Yes, it is.
So welcome very much, Chip. As
Thank
always,
you.
everybody
Thank you, Rita.
will be keeping an eye on the chat. If we don't get to your questions live, we'll follow up with you afterwards. So I thought I'd start you with a vow that my husband and I made at our wedding, which is longer ago than I think either of us care to remember. And it was the old line, grow old along with me, the best is yet to be, the last of life,
Mm.
which the first was made. And I kept thinking of that and just kept resonating in my head as I was reading your book, because you really are on a mission to redeem midlife.
Well, maybe redeem midlife and just even aging. I was lucky enough last year to give a TED talk, only a 3.5 minute one. They've learned over time, Chip, you know what, just say it short and sweet and move on. But I said something in that talk that I hadn't said before, which was I talked about, the world needs more pro-aging messages. We have lots of anti-aging messages, and they really sneak up on us in midlife. And let's acknowledge that most anti-aging messages are anti-women messages. They're sort of oriented toward women, making women feel badly about their natural aging process. So when I said pro-aging at TED, people said right on. And I think there's a relevance to this in the sense that Yale's Becca Levy has shown that when people shift their mindset on aging from a negative to a positive, they gain 7.5 years of additional life, which is more life than if they stopped smoking at 50 or started exercising at 50. So where are the PSAs? Where are the public service announcements for saying life gets better with age? This book is meant to be one of those.
I love that, and I love the message. And I'm reminded of our mutual friend Aviva Wittenberg Cox, who talks
I
about
love
four
her.
quarter lives, and
Yes.
how great the third quarter is. And
Yeah.
increasingly, what we're seeing, your comment about women made me realize it, but increasingly, what we're seeing is really that first or maybe second generation of women who were sort of fully allowed to be citizens, taking
Mhm.
massive leadership roles on a lot of different frameworks, and a lot of them are over 50.
Yes. Yeah. What's interesting about women and men when they reach 50 is women are sometimes coming into their own in their 50s. They're uh, Professor Zaltman at Harvard Business School, I think, showed that women's confidence in their careers in their 50s actually grows. And of course, there's also the fact that they're maybe not tending their kids anymore. They're not at child rearing age. And there's maybe just a sense like, okay, they've had the spinning plates of so many different obligations, so many roles, and maybe when you hit your 50s, you start to edit that a little bit. Men, on the other hand, have a different perspective. For men, it's they plateau in their 50s often, and sometimes actually decline in certain ways. Their confidence is not growing. There is a growing sense of irrelevance, and if they're a straight white man who has never experienced any ism in their life, meaning racism, sexism, homophobia, etc., all of a sudden at 55, they're starting to experience some ageism and they're not used to it. And the other thing about men in their 50s, and again, I was a man in my 50s. At one point, I'm 63 now. And I loved 50s, by the way. And we'll maybe come back to that. For a lot of men, they don't have the social support. Women have kept an ability to have that social wellness connection with friends, whereas men, for a lot of men, their friendship muscle atrophies as they get very busy in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and they don't know who to turn to. And part of the reason I wrote this book was because I lost 5 male friends to suicide,
Mm.
ages 42 to 52, during the Great Recession. And I just wish we had more social support out there for men and women in midlife.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think you're spot on with the sort of men women getting older difference. I have had a long running joke that our corporations are mostly designed for male life cycles, right? So you start off in your 20s and you're sort of proving yourself, and as you say, you're getting on the treadmill. Your 30s, you're kind of getting sorted into high potentials and everybody else. Your 40s, in many cases, you're taking the reins of power. Your 50s, you're allowed kind of one Corvette and a blonde, and then your 60s, you're handing off to the next generation.
You're on the golf course. You're on the golf
Oh,
course.
join the golf course, right? Or as my friend Marshall Goldsmith likes to say,
Yeah.
you need a plan because your wife doesn't love you that much.
She doesn't want you. She doesn't want you at home as much as you're going to be. So yes.
And whereas women's life choices we're now seeing can be completely different. And I think one of the great things, I mean, it's troubling, but one of the benefits of the kind of much more, what would I call it? Tour of duty kind of career situations that we're having in work is that there's a lot more places to come in. It used to be a ratchet, right? You joined
Yeah.
you joined a company at 25 and then you stayed with that company for a long time. And if you ever stepped off the treadmill, you could never get back on. But what we're seeing now is more chances for people that have had different paths to come and go.
Thank God. I mean, there was a book that came out a few years ago, Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott about called The 100-Year Life, and they spoke about the tyranny of the three-stage life. You learn till you're 20 or 25, you earn till you're 60 or 65, and then you adjourn or retire until you die. And that tyranny defined many of the past generations. And frankly, we're boomers, and it's defined us to some degree too. My two grandfathers didn't know each other until my parents met in college, but they both had the same employer for 40 years. And so we're in a different era. I mean, we have between 12 and 13 different employers or jobs over the course of a career these days. And people do leave the workforce to go get a master's, or they, have children and they come back in, or they take a year-long gap year, or a sabbatical. And so thank God, because it makes life a little more interesting than the board game, the game of life. If you remember that game where you just had one path through life, and you got your tokens. You got your tokens when you actually got your job and your first home and your children. And it's like, okay, let's have many paths. So I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And so one of the sort of break the book into these chunks, right? So different ways that the midlife chrysalis manifests itself. And those are sort of the buckets under your 12 reasons. So physical, emotional, mental, vocational, and spiritual. And I thought it was a very rich way of looking at this in kind of multiple dimensions.
Yeah, because in some ways, and by the way, let's call out the fact that Rita used the word chrysalis. I'm a big believer in the fact that midlife is not a crisis, which is, there's no life stage that has a more terrible brand than midlife, because everybody associates it with a crisis. But it's really more of a chrysalis, and the U curve of happiness research shows that in terms of, yes, our life satisfaction declines from our early to mid 20s, bottoming out around 45 to 50. But with each decade after that, we get happier and happier. So the reason I put it into these so there's 12 reasons why life gets better with age. And the reason why I wanted to even just say, like, we know it gets worse with age. Our short-term memory, as evidenced by the political world these days, our body usually is actually deteriorating in front of our eyes, etc. But there has been very little talked about in terms of what gets better with age. It happens in silos. So you hear Arthur Brooks talk about crystallized intelligence, and yes, that gets better with age. Or you hear Robert Levinson at UC Berkeley talk about emotional intelligence getting better with age. So I wanted to take it to 5 categories. And the reason I did that was partly because, generally speaking, in society, the only one of these categories when it comes to age that we tend to talk about is the physical side. It's like there's like one playing field, the physical playing field. And of the 5, it's the one where, frankly, age does have the biggest negative impact. So there's a couple different reasons why life gets better with age in the physical, and then there's three in emotional. And I think most of us can say pretty confidently that we're less emotionally reactive as we get older. We care less about what other people think about us. We get to a place where we actually have more compassion in our life. Um, these are qualities that get better with age. And then the third category is mental. And again, short-term memory, not so good, but wisdom gets better with age. And our ability to understand the narrative of our life, to be able to see the through line, gets better with age. And then the fourth category is vocational. You could say like, oh no, wait, vocational isn't it that best when you're young? If you're a software engineer, possibly. But I feel badly for all those people who went out to learn how to code 5 or 10 years ago, and now they're going to be out of a job because of artificial intelligence. But what gets better with age is your wisdom. It can be valuable in the workplace, and you can actually get off the treadmill and maybe define success differently than the way you did in your 20s, 30s, and 40s when you were living based upon someone else's success script. And then the final category is spiritually. And spiritually, whether it's how we relate with ourselves between our ego and our soul, or it's how we grow whole over time by learning how to integrate the polarities of gravitas and levity, curiosity and wisdom, extrovert and introvert, such that we are one whole being with all those polarities showing up every day, but in a sort of integrated, present kind of way.
I love that. I just absolutely love that. One of the things that Herminia Ibarra talks about this as well is that
She's teaching at our Modern Elder Academy in the fall. I love her.
I'm going to come to the Modern Elder Academy in just a
Yeah,
minute. Yeah,
yeah.
she's one of my oldest friends. She's wonderful.
Oh
And
my gosh, I love
so
her.
you'll appreciate this. So we were at the Drucker Forum last November, and she and Amy Edmondson and I got together, and my poor husband sat there for like 3 hours. While the three of us kind of dished on everything. It's fabulous.
Yeah,
He has the patience of a saint.
yeah.
But anyway, they one of the things she talks about is, in the way we've sort of constructed our social norms is we have all these bridging places which have a slot kind of in the cognitive library, right? So if you go to college, everybody knows what that is, right? If you go, you say, oh, well, I'm now in my late 20s, I want to go get an MBA. Everybody knows what that is. But if I'm 50 or 55 and I decide, hey, I really want to go from being, I don't know, a lawyer to being an artist, we don't have a place for
Yeah,
that to happen. And in some ways, I think maybe Modern Elder Academy
that exactly.
something like that, right? So tell me
Yeah,
the origin. You have to tell our listeners about the origin of the phrase modern elder, because I think that
yeah,
is
yeah. No,
wonderful.
it's a troubling phrase on some level for many people. So yeah, my history is I started a boutique hotel company in my mid-20s called Joie de Vivre. It grew to 52 boutique hotels around California, the second largest in the US. And in my late 40s, I struggled. So I've been running the company for 22 years, and we had the Great Recession, but I was going through a dark time, and this was also when I was losing those friends to suicide. Um, Everything that could go wrong was going wrong in all the different parts of my life. And then I had an NDE and a near-death experience, an allergic reaction to an antibiotic, and it woke me up. It was like the hotelier's wake-up call. And I said, I need to change my life. And I changed my life in many ways. I now call this the great midlife edit. And Brené Brown would call this the midlife unraveling. And that sounds so awful, but she said, Chip, when you look at the word ravel, it means something so tightly wound you can't get it undone. And that's how a lot of people sometimes feel in midlife. They feel stuck. And at age 50, all of a sudden, I was no longer running a company I've been running for 2 dozen years. I didn't have that identity anymore, which was, I felt naked. And I spent the first couple of years of my 50s doing what Mary Catherine Bateson at Harvard, who's recently passed, called the midlife atrium. I spent a little bit of time reflecting on how do I want to consciously curate the second half of my adult life. And I was asked, soon after that by the three founders of Airbnb to be their modern elder. They didn't call me that initially. They said they wanted me to be the in-house mentor. but also the head of global hospitality and strategy. But after a month or two, they pulled me aside and said, Chip, you know what? You're a modern elder. And I said, I don't want to be a modern elder. You're making fun of my age, because I was twice the age of the average person there at age 52. And they said, a modern elder is someone who's as curious as they are wise. And that really stuck with me, that the idea of the alchemist of curiosity and wisdom, knowing when to use one versus the other in a workplace as a boomer where I was surrounded by millennials. And so I spent 7.5 years, 4 years full time as the in-house mentor to the founders, and then 3.5 years as a part-time strategic advisor, taking the company up to its IPO. And I loved it. I loved it. And that led me to working on a book down in Baja on the beach. I had a home on the beach, an hour north of Cabo San Lucas. And the book was called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. It was really my story of being at Airbnb and intergenerational collaboration and all that. Well, while I was there in Baja writing the book, I went for a run on the beach. And one day I had a Baja aha. And that Baja aha, the epiphany was, why don't we have midlife wisdom schools? Why don't we have places where, as you were saying a couple minutes ago, Rita, people can come and reimagine and repurpose themselves? You can have a litigation attorney who hates her job but has been very successful at it. And at age 60, she can't do it anymore, but she doesn't know what her options are. And the person I'm thinking of, who was in fact that person, ended up becoming a pastry chef, partly because she went back to childhood and asked, what was it that I loved doing when I was a kid? And she loved hanging out in the kitchen with her grandmother, baking pies. And as an adult, if there's a bakery around, she will go and look in the bakery, smell. She'll have like a visceral reaction to the smells. And so she decided to go become a pastry chef, actually initially just to like train for 3 or 4 months to see if she liked it. And now she's opening a bakery in her neighborhood because the bakery that had been there closed down during COVID. So if you told her at the start of the week, at the end of this week, you're going to realize that you want to be a baker, she would have said, no way. That felt way too divorced from being a litigation attorney. But we see that all the time. We've had 4,200 people come to our campus from 47 countries, and they don't always have something that's that disparate. Sometimes they say, okay, I don't want to do this full time anymore. I want to have a portfolio career where I have 3 or 4 different ways I make money. And what are those ways that I could do that? And sometimes people come for non-career reasons also: divorce, menopause, health diagnoses, spiritual awakenings, etc.
So tell us kind of what the setup is. You've got regular classes that are sort of anybody can join, and you also do group supported kinds of
Yeah.
things.
So we have online programs. In fact, we have one starting today called Navigating Transitions. And that one's 6 weeks long, and people from all over the world participate in those. And then we actually have a week longer, it's usually 5 night long programs that either in Baja at our campus on the beach, which is so beautiful. I love it down there, or here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I am right now, where we have a campus opening this spring, which is on 2,600 acres. It's a regenerative horse ranch, and it has 2 retreat centers on it. And so if you're coming to a workshop, you're going through our process, our program. And the program is really dedicated to helping people navigate transitions, cultivate purpose, own their wisdom. Because I love this quote from David Viscott, which is: the purpose of our life is to find our gift. The work of life is to develop it. And the meaning of life is to give it away. So what is that gift? What is that mastery? What is that wisdom? And I like to call it same seed, different soil. You've developed a seed. Where do you plant it in the soil? And I was lucky enough as a bricks and mortar hotelier to be all of a sudden in a tech company, taking my seed of what I'd learned in hospitality and in leadership and applying it there. And then the fourth pillar of our program is helping people to reframe their relationship with aging. And so, yeah, we do that. We do it private programs. As you know, Rita, we had a Silicon Guild group program there. We do YPO, WPO, we're working with them, Jewish Federation of North America, Inc. Magazine Masters Program. So the thing that's weird is a midlife wisdom school like this just didn't exist. What has existed for a while, which I am a big fan of, is the Nexel Collaborative. This is like Harvard's ALI, Advanced Leadership Initiative, or Stanford's DCI, the Distinguished Careers Institute. Those programs, and at maybe 20 different colleges, are year-long fellowships where you come and you go to classes with young people, and then you have a group of, let's say, 40 fellows for the year that you're getting to know and spend time with, and do programs with them as well. And most of average age is probably 60. Our average age is about 54. But that kind of program, which is beautiful, is not, like how many people can afford a year and 60 or $80,000 to go to a program like that? So they're the Mercedes and we're the Volkswagen. Yes, we do get lots of well-known CEOs and investment bankers and things like that, but we also have financial aid such that an elementary school teacher or a union plumber actually can come to MEA. And I'm very proud of that, because when you have 24 people in a workshop together, wisdom is not taught, it's shared. And when you have a diverse group of people together, learning wisdom from people very different than you, but in the same age cohort, is fascinating.
Mhm. Oh, it must be. And if you've got international participants too, that must
Yeah.
add another dimension to it. Oh, for sure. Um, yeah, unfortunately, the next one that we were supposed to do together, I'm going to have to miss but for a really good reason. Our daughter's getting married that exact same weekend.
Well, that's okay. You know what? It's totally fine. I mean, so, but yes, I love what Karimi is saying here. That midlife comes with wisdom and more time to experience new things. That's what Karimi's speaking to there, is the idea of time affluence.
Mm.
So time affluence. When we, Kevin Kelly, the technologist who's a friend, says to be rich you need money, to be wealthy you need time. And one of the things that actually comes with midlife and later, if we have done our great midlife edit, if we have edited obligations and roles and mindsets that aren't serving us anymore, is we actually have some space in our life. And to have time affluence gives us the space to become a beginner again. Don't invite me to a cocktail party, because my favorite question to ask at a cocktail party is, at what in your life are you a beginner these days? People run for the bar when they hear that one. But it's really helpful for people to recognize that, being curious and having an openness to new experiences is directly correlated with living a longer, healthier, happier life. Peter Drucker is my modern elder on this one. I mean, he lived till his mid-90s. He wrote 2/3 of his 40 books after the age of 65. And he had a practice. And the practice was, every 2 years, he would study something that he was just curious about that had nothing to do transactionally with being a business school professor or author. It could be Japanese flower arranging or, medieval war strategies. And Peter Drucker, would become one of the world's leading experts on this topic, because he saw that this was like the fountain of youth. To actually be curious about something and to learn about it and in detail and have passion about it, just created almost like an elixir for his mind and his heart and his soul. And so it is a core component of our MEA program, is helping people take off the blinders, get off the treadmill, at least for a week, and have the time to start being curious about things that we didn't have time to give attention to. Yeah, and some miraculous things can happen when you do that.
You've got a very specific example in the book of the editing process. I wonder if you wouldn't mind going through that.
Yeah. So one of the exercises we do at MEA, and that you can do in the book, you don't have to come to MEA to do it, is you can actually start to imagine, what are the mindsets that you have, or roles you have, or ways of being or thinking that you have, that just don't feel like they're serving you anymore. For me, I mean, it could be something as simple as, I hate yoga, or it could be something as simple, the world is a dark place,
Or
or
I'm not that kind of person. I'm not creative.
I'm not creative, or I'll never meet my soulmate, or I'm terrible with money, or you name it. There's a lot of mindsets. I always have to be the caregiver, but I can never caregive myself. So there's a lot. Let me tell you, there's a lot of these mantras people have in their brain. The way we do it at MEA is, there's 300 stickers, each with a mindset on it, and a few
Oh,
that are empty, where people could write something on it. And people then put these on themselves, and they start to see each other's mindsets, and they start to have conversations about, how they could shift out of that mindset into another one. I'll use a very simple one. I love to meditate, but I'm terrible at yoga. And I think of myself as not limber, but lumber, meaning I am just so stiff. I call myself stiff upper chip, because my upper body is so stiff. And so I had a mindset that, here I am, running a midlife wisdom school where there's yoga classes, mindfulness, like, you won't find Chip in a yoga class, that's for sure, because I didn't want to embarrass myself. So what I had to do is really see, like, okay, I have a mindset, which is I'm just terrible at yoga, or I hate yoga. And so I actually looked at what's the trigger for that. The trigger for me was actually social comparison. And
Hmm.
then I said, like, wow, our yoga teacher, I love the guy, his name's Teddy. Maybe he could come over and do like one-on-one yoga sessions with me 2 or 3 times a week. And he did. And all of a sudden I started enjoying it more. So I got to the place where I could shift out of the mindset, I hate yoga, to I love how I feel after a yoga class. And it wasn't always that I loved the yoga class. It was more like I loved how I feel after yoga class, and shifting that mindset. And again, this was a really minor one. I mean, it could be like, the mindset could be I'm always the victim. It's like, wow, okay, there's a lot of work we got to do to sort of like sort through that one. This one's more mundane about the yoga. But what it really helped me to do is to see, like, okay, you know what? There was a way to get out of that mindset and to try a new mindset and change a behavior, by doing one-on-one yoga, that helped me to get to a better place on this. So what we do at the Great Midlife Edit is we go to the fire at sunset at the end of that first day, and you write on a piece of paper all the things you're going to let go of, all of the things that need to be edited from your life, because the first half of our life is about accumulating all kinds of things, stuff, kids, responsibilities, roles, reputational issues,
Tech.
and then tech. And then the second half of our life is about editing. But nobody told us that. Nobody said at midlife, we're supposed to actually get more discerning about what we're adding, and we need to actually subtract some things. I mean, we do know downsizing is a phenomenon that we hear about people doing often when they're retired. But what I'm saying is, way before you downsize your home, there's a bunch of other downsizing you need to do. And then you say that in front of everybody, throw it in the fire, and then you say, and here's what I'm replacing it with. And it is a beautiful collective ritual that gives people a sense of, like, wow, I'm 24 hours into this thing and I am committed to making some changes in my life.
And I think providing the space for that is
Yeah.
is so rare. I think that's where something like Modern Elder Academy to me really, it's in the calendar, it's a date, it's going to be, doing things that are meaningful, and but it's a time set apart, and this time scarcity versus time affluence. I sometimes think we're just in this, I don't know, symbolic morass of busyness. Everybody runs around talking about how busy they are, and I'm guilty of it as well. But
Yeah.
is your self-worth reflected by how completely out of control your schedule is? Somehow that doesn't make any sense to me.
I am, I'm terrible at this. I mean, sometimes the shaman is the wounded healer. So I am someone who's teaching something that I needed to learn. And what I needed to learn was how I disengaged my self-esteem from a full calendar means that I'm important and I have self-esteem. And I still have that issue. Let me be really clear. But during COVID, wow, was I given a gift? The gift I was given was, I was in Baja on our campus. It was empty for a while just because of COVID. And I had a lot of space in my life. And I started doing something called spying on the divine. I came up with this with Dr. Keltner. Dr. Dr. Keltner, UC Berkeley professor who started the Greater Good Science Center, who is on our faculty at MEA. He's the world's leading expert on awe. So what I started doing was I would
Cool
put
thing to be
three.
the world's leading expert on.
Isn't it great? Well, also he lives within walking distance of the MEA campus in Baja. So when the world's leading expert on awe lives part-time near where your campus is or where you live, you're living in a good place. So Dacker helped me to see that if you took just 3 hours a day, maybe 3 days a week, and I called it spying on the divine, where I would go into nature with my dog without a podcast, which is hard. I love going for walks and listening to podcasts. No podcasts. It was me and my dog, Jamie, in nature. I tried to go to a different place in nature each time, where I imagine I am a 6-year-old looking at things for the first time. And I ask the following question before I go on that walk. I say, nature, what do you have to teach me today? And it was hard. I mean, 3 hours is a long time. But once I got the hang of it, I loved it because I would come back from those 3 hours spying on the divine experiences full of ideas,
Hmm.
full of new ideas. And just, it was like somebody had planted a bunch of things in my brain, a lot of inspirations. And I just realized that, when I'm living my normal life, there's no room for inspiration to come through me because I'm just back to back. And so, yeah, I'm a big believer in that. The other thing about that Dacker wrote about when his book called Awe came out last year, he said that nature's the third most likely way people feel awe in the world. There's two ahead of it that were surprises, but they really describe what we try to create at MEA. And number two is collective effervescence. When your sense of ego separation starts to evaporate and your sense of communal joy starts to kick in. And you might, I was on the board of Burning Man for 10 years.
I was going to ask about that.
I
Yeah.
was one of the founding board members of the Burning Man nonprofit, and collective effervescence is what you see at Burning Man, but you also see it in the church when there's music, like gospel church, Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco. I was on the board there. I loved the gospel music there. You could see it at an artistic performance, but you could also see it in an opportunity where you're connected to a small group of people who are all sort of on the same page about something. And then number one on his list was moral beauty. Oh my gosh, do we need more of this? Moral beauty is when you witness kindness, compassion, uh, resilience, grit, equanimity, the best humanity has to offer. You're an enlightened witness of something that makes you feel good about being a human. We don't have nearly enough of that these days. But these are the top two ways globally that people experience awe. And when Dacker came to me and said, Chip, that's what MEA does. It does those two things. It helps people with that. And this is why they come back. People come back over and over and over again. It's like, oh, wow. I didn't know. I was driving without a license on this thing. I started a midlife wisdom school without necessarily having training as an educator. But it is being pro-social is essential. Last thought on this, Rita. Bob Waldinger at Harvard, who's been directing for the last decade or two, the 85-year-long longitudinal study of adult development, basically studying the same people for 85 years. They're now in their centenarians, the ones that are left. He said really clearly when his book came out last year called The Good Life, the number one variable for people who are happy and healthy in their 80s and 90s and beyond is how connected were they uh, relationally with people in their midlife and beyond. And so I think part of what we're trying to do with MEA is to help people, build that atrophied muscle of friendship and of connection and of depth of conversation that we all need.
I think that's fantastic. One of the things you talked about coming back from your meditations with nature, full of ideas, and there's a whole science of how our brains work in terms of creative problem solving. And one of my colleagues, Bill Duggan at Columbia, likes to talk about this. He says, if you ask people where they get their best ideas, it's not a brainstorming session. It's not, a creativity thing. It's not a boot camp with thousands of Post-it notes. It's like the shower or whatever. It's when our brains are allowed to be a bit idle that we become open to some of these patterns that we otherwise don't see. And
Yeah.
I think you're
Yeah.
describing a very disciplined way of doing that.
It's also why they come up in our dreams. Because I think whether they're in our dreams or when we're idle in places where we can create connections, the synapses are firing, so you see things in a new way. And it's, well, one of my friends from IDEO used to take his team to the zoo or to the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art or other places with an intention to say, your role here is to just let your mind go and be as weird as possible in terms of what you're connecting. And let's come back and then let's have a brainstorm after that.
Mm. So one of the things that I found very interesting in the book was this whole hero's journey theme.
Yeah.
And of course, those of you who aren't familiar with this, there's a book called A Hero with a Thousand Faces. And what the book distills is the sort of narrative arc of just about every memorable great story that informs us of the human condition, from ancient Rome's all right up to Star Wars, and beyond.
Yeah.
But you applied it to people's own lives in a super interesting way.
Yeah, I mean that's the most dense and maybe complicated chapter in the book. And the
Maybe that's
book's
why I dropped,
you liked it, yeah. No, I mean, the book was written for the mainstream. That particular chapter was not. It's written, it could be its own book because it really, the premise of this chapter is as you get older, you understand your life narrative better. You can see the through line and you can see maybe the shadow. And so Joseph Campbell in that book and others have talked about there's like 3 stages to any transition. There's the default world that you were in, but you have to end to the call to adventure. And in the call to adventure, you're in the messy middle and you're going through, you're slaying dragons or dragons are slaying you. And sometimes those dragons are inside of you. They're emotional dragons. And then on the third piece of this, you come back into society with a beginning, but with a whole new perspective than you had when you started. And what I really wanted to do is take that model, the hero or heroine's journey, turn it on its side, and sort of say like, well, this is not the hero's journey, it's the human journey. And the human journey comes from a place of saying, um, I have had some patterns and I have had a sort of standard in my life that has gotten me to, especially in the shadow side of the messy middle, to showing up being resentful. That's mine that came up. And, my tendency is often to the great African proverb, which is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I am a fast, go alone kind of person generally. And that works sometimes, and there's other times when it doesn't. And what I can see when I did my own hero's journey was like, oh, wow, this is a pattern for me. And pattern recognition is a form of wisdom. And to be able to have that kind of pattern recognition of your own life so that you can see before, you get to the point of resentment, these are the steps that happen before I get there. So I tell my own story there, but I also talk about a woman named Joelle Calton, who's an MEA alum, who until she was about age 30 she was a waitress and a restaurant server and didn't have a lot of confidence in herself. And it was partly because of some childhood stuff that had gone on. And then she decided she wanted to be a therapist. And so she went from serving people in restaurants to serving people on couches. That experience for her, and then going back and looking at her patterns was incredibly just it was dynamic to see her, especially as a psychologist, to see her pattern. So, yeah, if you all read the book or listen to the book, there's some good exercises in that chapter about how to create your own or design your own hero's journey.
I love that. I think it's a great exercise. I do a sort of a shorter version of that called the lifeline, where you just
Yeah,
talk about the
yeah.
twists and turns in your own life and what lessons, what values you drove out of that. But I think this is a lovely kind of add-on. So we got a great question from Fernando Alde. On behalf of his friend, Tom Morgan, so if the pursuit of wisdom is so important, what stops people from spending money on it? And if you had a blank sheet of paper and unlimited resources and you wanted to pursue wisdom, where would you start?
Okay. So let's recognize first and foremost that we have been living in a knowledge society. It was Peter Drucker who in 1959 coined the term knowledge workers. Nobody had any idea what he was talking about, but he said knowledge workers will rule the world someday. And he meant people who understood computers and data and being able to use information technology as a way of making better decisions. And guess what? 2, 3 decades later, knowledge management was a practice in larger companies. We're, in my opinion, moving out of the era of the knowledge worker and maybe into the era of the wisdom worker, because quite frankly, all of the world's knowledge is on your iPhone. And AI is, just basically commoditized knowledge. Um, so I think that wisdom is an abstract thing. And why don't people spend money on it? Well, partly because it's a bit abstract. What is something someone could do to become wiser? Let me just tell you an exercise I've been doing since age 28. And I would say it's helped me a lot. So when I was 28, I was 2 years into being CEO of this boutique hotel company, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I mean, yes, my first hotel was moderately successful as a rock and roll hotel, and then we had the Loma Prieta earthquake in the Bay Area, and nobody was coming to San Francisco. No one was coming to the Bay Area, and I had no money. I didn't have a lot of working capital, and I was lost. And so one day on a Friday afternoon, I went home and I took a journal off the wall and I wrote on the cover of it my wisdom book. And who knew I mean, I still got that book. It's very interesting. And I started a practice where every weekend I would sit down and make a series of bullet points of what I'd learned personally or professionally that week. And then how each of those bullet points, there might be four or six, how each of those bullet points was going to serve me in the future. So what I was really doing was I was metabolizing my life experiences. I believe that our painful life lessons are often the raw material for our future wisdom. And the longer you've been on this planet, the more raw material you have. But there are a lot of older people who have not sifted through their raw material. They've had painful life lessons, but they haven't made sense of them. And so I was making sense of them every single darn week. And I now do this I did this at Joie de Vivre, I did it at Airbnb, I'm now doing it at MEA with my leadership team. Once a quarter, we come together for a longer meeting. Maybe instead of an hour meeting, it's a 90-minute or 2-hour meeting. And each person says, here was my biggest lesson of the last quarter and how it's going to serve me moving forward. So it requires some candor, some vulnerability, some recognition of, I don't know it all. This was particularly valuable at Airbnb, where there are a lot of know-it-alls there. So helping people to come forward with this was really helpful. And then and we also got to learn from each other. Oh, wow, that's a great lesson. Your lesson, which was painful for you, can be my lesson because wisdom is not taught, it's shared. And then we would finish the meeting with a conversation about what was our biggest team lesson for the quarter. So, wow. So that's a wisdom management practice. So at the if you go to the MEA website, it's called meawisdom.com is the URL. At the bottom footer, there's a bunch of free resources, but there's one in particular around wisdom that I think, is it Fernando or who asked this question? Yes. Take a look at the bottom header of the whole website. You'll see why successful leaders value wisdom. I would read that. It's free. It's just it'll take you an hour to read. I think you might enjoy it.
That's great. You're
also my book, Wisdom at Work. Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, definitely speaks to the idea of how do we help mine wisdom in a company or individually.
which is one of your previous books. Yeah.
That is right, exactly.
So one of the things that I think about, which your comment on what are we moving towards if knowledge has become basically commoditized, is I think about what I'll call them management technologies in terms of eras have been. So the first kind of industrial revolution management technology, where we're replacing efforts of animals and men with machines, right? You can sort of think of that as the execution era, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved into the expertise era, which really was Drucker and knowledge work. And, if I can learn faster than the next person, I'm going to win. And I think we may be on the brink, and I'm hopeful of this, is moving into the empathy era. Where, and one of the projects I'm personally working on is how do we create scaled systems that have a human dimension to them? And I've been doing a lot of reading. People like Paul LeBlanc have written about this, which is, we tend to borrow this machine analogy to scaling systems. We want everything to be uniform and exact and precise. And the reality is human beings are messy as all get out and unpredictable and whatever. Like I keep telling the autonomous vehicle people, you will never get it right if you try to mix the machines with the robots. What you should do is just get the humans out of there. Right? Completely autonomous only, and you'll have a much easier time. So,
I love that.
But anyway, so I think if we think about wisdom and empathy and qualities like that, it's really something that is uniquely human. And when the the low level repetitive work is all being done by machines. Where do we need to go next?
I mean, what we need to do is to like double down on humanity. And so whether that's ingenuity and innovation that has deep creative roots, intuition, empathy, compassion, um, the kinds of qualities that understanding a room, how do you read a room? I remember when I was at Airbnb, I had over 100 mentees over the 7.5 years. Someone said, Chip, I love how you read a room and how you run a meeting. Will you teach me that? And I was like, this is one of the challenges with wisdom is something you develop over time. Sometimes it's almost ineffable, or you can't articulate it because you're relying upon your spidey senses that actually tell you like that person over there is not. So I had to actually go through the process with this person to say like, okay, here's how I run a meeting. There's some of it's technical in terms of like, okay, here's the things you got to do to run a good meeting. And then there was the component of like, how do you read a room? And that's when it got really much more, right brain. And it helped me though, because sometimes actually taking something that is intuitive and taking it down to some, steps that make you help you understand it. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good at it because some people are naturally good at certain things and not at others. But it does help to maybe allow you to teach in a way that is a combination of left brain and right brain. And generally, the other thing that Picasso said long ago, computers are useless. They only give you answers. And I think there's some truth to that too, because I think a great wise person, as Jimi Hendrix said long ago, knowledge speaks and wisdom listens. A great wise person is somebody who listens with their every fiber of themselves and are completely present and they're listening for what you're not saying, not just what you're saying. And then they pose a catalytic question. Computers don't do that yet. They may, but they don't do that yet. A great coach, a great therapist, a great friend, a spouse may do that. That is what we help teach at MEA. It's called the appreciative inquiry method of asking questions, and I think it's really an important part of what it means to be a modern elder, someone who's as curious as they are wise.
I love that. I just love that. So Patty Hull would like to know, what does some of your experience suggest is the perhaps benefit of a 4-day week where you've got just that more time, where work shifts into something that isn't so time bound, and that perhaps with that remaining day that we otherwise would have been, moving pencils from one side of our desk to the other, does that open up space for creativity and the ability to do different things?
I think, certain industries can't do this very easily, others can. So let's start with that. I'm a big fan of it. And the reason I'm a fan of it is because, in the 40 years ago, well, unless there was an emergency, you didn't call someone at home on the home phone to ask them a question about work. You just don't do that. I mean, like that's the sacred space. You go home and you have family, you have the nuclear family dinner. Um, so today, because our phones are with us all the time and both our personal life and our business life are, woven like a frappe. We do not, we don't have sort of sacred space. We don't have the Sabbath. We don't have the things that actually give us some space. So I think actually helping people, depending upon the industry, again, and the kind of job, giving people the opportunity to concentrate for maybe 10 hours in a day for 4 days, as opposed to, 8 hours for 5 days, gives people more time off on weekends, longer weekends, and gives people some of that creative space that they need. So I support the idea of it. I do think it's hard, like in the hotel industry. There's the reason there's 8-hour shifts is because you could have three of them in a 24-hour period. So if you have 10-hour shifts, like, okay, how does that work? This is for line level employees. So I want to be clear that I think that there are a lot of industries and positions that may not be able to do this easily, at least not yet. So let's start with the ones that can do it easily. And of course, remote work has, I think, moved us in a direction where this is even more doable because of the fact that we aren't, commuting on the road as much either, which is nice. So
Well, it's
thank
I,
you.
A lot of the companies I work with right now, people are sick of it on the one hand, but we haven't figured it out on the other, which is the whole work from home, work from office, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I personally am of the view that we're framing it all wrong, that, what we need to be thinking about is wherever you happen to physically be, are you creating a context in which your work has meaning? You're clear about what you're trying to accomplish. You've got a sense of agency, you've got control, you've got the ability to make an impact, and all those things are great. And you can have that in an office setting, and you can certainly
Yeah.
have it in a non-office setting. And on the other hand, if your day at work is full of, toxic personalities and unreasonable demands and micromanagement and, just everything everybody loves to hate about, the world of Dilbert, right?
Yes, yes.
And you can have that at home as easily as you can have that at work. So I kind of think we're misframing that debate.
I think we are.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was talking to a corporate person about this the other day, and I was testing the hypothesis with her. And I said, well, so here's my hypothesis. A lot of the reasons many senior executives are saying, I want everybody's butts back in the office, is because they're just not willing to do the work required to redesign the employee or work life experience in a way that accomplishes that goal of people wanting to be engaged and wanting to be there. And so what's happening now is people are showing up because they have to, but they don't actually want to be there.
No, and that is, disengagement is essential. I wrote a book a few years ago, 16 years ago, 17 years ago, called Peak: How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow. And it was really applying Maslow's hierarchy of needs to employees, customers, and investors. And it's just as relevant today as it was back then, because if you can try to help people, generally the pyramid, the three-level pyramid for employees is money or compensation at the base, recognition in the middle, and meaning at the top. And autonomy is a piece of recognition. But helping people to see that pyramid is, to me, one of my favorite things to do is in a company when, now the truth is in investment banking, the money part of the pyramid is 90% of the pyramid. But the differentiators are recognition and meaning. And Goldman Sachs, long ago when they were a good company, if they ever were, but I think they were, really learned that. They realized that those are the two things that were going to be differentiators for them.
So one of the things that has been on my mind a lot, and I know we've talked about a bit, is this movement we've had, and I don't know exactly when, but a lot of people would precisely pin it to Milton Friedman's very famous shareholders first argument in the New York Times. But this increasingly financialized world of capitalism. And so a good friend of mine is William Lazonick at UMass at Amherst. And he does these fantastic, really interesting studies of firms that, as you say about Goldman Sachs, were once good firms. And then they somehow fall into this financialization trap where they stop investing in their people, they stop investing in their processes. It all becomes about a stock price. And Boeing would be a poster child for this, right?
Boeing is a total poster child. Yep.
And what I'm wondering is what could we do? And I see all the pressures that cause this to happen. But in your view, are there things we could do that could be an anti-pressure to that? Like, I'll give you an example of one. Like it used to be back before the 70s. If you were a CEO and you did a mass layoff, you were a disgrace. Like people would not talk to you at the country club.
Shame. We need shame to come back. Let's come back of shame.
Well, maybe shame's one of them. It could be.
Yeah.
But I struggle with, the outlines of what the rewards are and what the benefits are of behaving that way are so clear to so many people. And there are people, there are sharks out there who are very motivated by that, right? There's got to be a counterbalance.
I think, the good news is over the last 40, 60 years, I think we've moved, I think we have moved in a better direction. And whether it's the conscious capitalism movement, or some of the ESG kind of things, there's some good stuff there. Where I think that one of the fundamental challenges, though, is the stock market and the fact we have quarterly earnings, because the truth is, when you're doing things that are long-term oriented, but you're actually getting rewarded short-term, you have an inequity that you've built, and so if it's all about short-term earnings in order to boost the stock price so that the CEO, who has a very lucrative package, can make more money because of the short-term earnings, who are we, what are we pretending not to know?
Mhm.
So I think, looking at the combination of the financial incentives for senior executives and board members, and helping people look at this as a long-term thing. There's a book that came out years ago called Firms of Endearment, and it's a terrible name, but Firms of Endearment by Raj Sisodia, and I can't remember who else wrote it, but he's a professor, and it was a very good book about showing that how companies that have a long-term perspective and make long-term decisions have better long-term stock market performance.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think being able to help sort of capture that so that, senior leaders can see, yeah, maybe we should focus on the long term. And there's certain companies that have had that point of view, and they didn't really care about what the institutional investors thought of them. And
But
generally, if it,
here's where
yeah,
I feel there's just a systemic disconnect that is completely fixable in my view,
yep,
which is most of the money that's in the financial system is actually long-term money. It's pension funds, it's
yep,
sovereign wealth funds, it's long-term investment capital. So their interests and the interests of the long term are actually very aligned. The people that get out of alignment in the middle are the sort of the mechanics, right? The traders,
yep,
those
yep,
people.
yep,
And there is absolutely no reason why we couldn't have two parallel accounting systems, right? One which looks at a
mhm,
3 to 5 year horizon, and the other which looks at a quarterly and annual horizon. And there's absolutely no reason we couldn't do that if we wanted to.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm intrigued at the kind of misalignment between the actual people that are investing want long term. Clearly, a lot of us that are interested in the successful functioning of capitalism and kindness to workers and all that kind of thing want long term. And then there's just this sort of engineering piece in the middle that we haven't figured out yet. And I just wonder if it's as simple as starting there.
yeah. I would agree. And I think, there's carried interest. I mean, and we can get into some policy wonky stuff about, carried interest, being treated differently. There's some ways with tax policy you could actually change some of this as well. So, but that's getting way off of learning to love midlife. I know
So,
we've got to go soon,
while
but
I've
thank
got
you.
you here, I might as well ask some of the really hard existential questions. So, for those of you that would like to see the book, this is what it looks like. It's called Learning to Love Midlife. It is a truly terrific book. It goes through 12 reasons why this is actually a great time of life and tries to be your public service announcement for really enjoying it. And for those of you that are interested in maybe going a little further than just reading the book, Chip has founded this Modern Elder Academy, which provides these thoughtful spaces where you can create wisdom and create time and space for yourself. So where do people go to learn more?
They could go to meawisdom.com or chipconley.com. And I have a daily blog that I post on my LinkedIn profile. So you're welcome to check out my LinkedIn profile too, because I like writing daily.
It takes discipline. That takes a lot of
It
discipline.
does. It does.
Well, Chip Conley,
Thank,
what a
thank you,
pleasure.
Rita.
I could talk to you all day. So thank you so much and have a lovely weekend, everyone.